We're going to be making a pumpkin out of Model Magic. And this one here was made with just one 1 ounce pouch of Model Magic, so it's a little on the smaller side. In the example for today, we're going to use 2 ounces and hopefully get double the size of this pumpkin. So I'm going to move our already made one that's already been dried off to the side and get started on today's. So first thing we're going to do is open up the Model Magic. Always only open it right when you're ready to use it. I like to use scissors and just kind of cut the packaging, and then it just sort of peels open. Now I want to save a little bit to use for the stem of the pumpkin, so I like to use my scissors also for cutting and portioning Model Magic. So I'm just going to take my scissors and cut a piece off for what I want to save for the stem, and then I'll set that aside. Now you'll notice I'm working on top of a composition notebook. That is because this particular one has a plastic cover. So for anything that I do with Model Magic, I like to work on a smooth, slick surface like plastic, or even directly onto a desk, but I have my messy mat on here. If you work on paper or something porous, the Model Magic will stick to it. So that's why we're using the smooth plastic. And I'm just going to start squishing it and kneading it together. That's good enough for now. Now you'll notice this one is white. It hasn't had any color added to it. I'm saving this to show you another finishing technique. But for this one, we're going to add color directly into the white clay, and that's why we have these markers here. This is my favorite trick for adding color to white Model Magic. The first thing we need to do is try to roll this out like a pancake, and I actually just use a marker as a rolling pin to do that. Now with my marker, I'm going to add some color to my clay, my Model Magic clay. And the way I do that is I actually just color right on it. Don't press into it too much because you don't want to clog up your marker nib, but you can add color just by coloring onto the Model Magic. So we don't get too much of this marker on our hands. That's why we rolled it out like a flat pancake. We're now going to fold this in onto itself, and you can see it's stuck right here on the edge of the composition book where it wasn't plastic. So if this whole thing had been paper, we wouldn't even be able to roll this up. So that is why you want to try to use something that is a slick, smooth surface. And now we just kind of smush it up and stretch and knead the Model Magic, and you'll see it's going to start to tint. So it's going to start as a very light pastel, and we're going to roll it out again. So what you're going to do is you're going to repeat the coloring, kneading or mushing, and then rolling it out over and over until you get to the depth and richness of color that you want. It's going to take quite a few times. You can also use, if you don't want to use water-based markers, you could use watercolor or even food coloring I think would work, but we're going to use the markers, and I'm just going to keep doing this a few times. So right now, I've done a few different mixes. I've done some custom mixing with different markers, not just the original purple. And now I have a very unique sort of lavender purple color. So I feel like that's mixed enough for what I want. If you want it to be a darker color, you'd have to do a lot more rounds to get it to be darker. But this is good enough for what I'm looking to do. And now I'm going to just roll it into a round sphere. So I want this as smooth as it can get. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but you don't want any like really obvious cracks. It can have a few because we're going to be making a pumpkin, and so pumpkins do have some marks to them, but that right there, that's pretty good. So we can start with that. Already you can see that it is much bigger than the one pouch pumpkin. And so when you have it down on a surface, it automatically starts to flatten the base. That's fine. We can do that. And now we're going to add the sections of the pumpkin. And to do that, I'm using just a craft stick. So this is a lot like a popsicle stick, but you don't want to use one that's been in a popsicle because it can have residue on it from the popsicle. So get a craft stick that has not been already used in a food application. And then I'm just taking the edge of it and sort of pressing into the side of the pumpkin and then rotating, and I'm holding my thumb on the bottom and one finger at the top so I don't smush it. You want to be really delicate with this to not smush it because it is pretty soft at this point. And then we're going to keep going. Just this rocking motion back and forth, and the more times you rock, the deeper a crease you're going to get. There we go. So there it is. And if you do see any parts where you maybe accidentally did indent with your finger, you can go ahead and try to reshape those. But again, this is really soft at this point, so you want to be very careful. And we are going to make a little indent for the stem, and you can use anything you want. I do have some different sized paintbrushes. So these are, the range from biggest to smallest for the type of indent I could make. And I'm going to use the bigger one on the stem. So I'm just going to take the end of the paintbrush and press it into the pumpkin. And it is a little bit deep, but that's because I'm going to want to insert the stem. So that's why it's a little on the deeper side. Okay, so I'm going to very gently just kind of move this over and try not to touch it too much, because now I need to color the stem. The stem is still white, so this won't take as long to color because it is so small, but I'm going to use just the black. So there you go. It's almost like a teal. It doesn't really look black. And that's something that once you know that that's what it does, you can actually use that to your advantage. And then we're going to roll this out into a coil. And just be aware of the diameter of that opening. You can use the tip of the paintbrush or whatever you use to make the opening there to kind of gauge if you've got it the right size. And then as it gets towards the end, we want it to taper so we can make a little spiral. So the way you do that is you put less pressure on the wider side, and then you add more pressure. You're pushing down a little bit more on the part that you want to taper. And taper just means to get smaller, make it thinner on one side. Okay, so that's going to end up being our stem. And before we place it, we're going to create that coil. So we're going to just give this a little twist. Okay, and then Model Magic really does, for the most part, stick to itself, but there are a few tricks that you can use to help it stick extra well. And one of those that I do that's not fully necessary, but it's just sort of like insurance, is I take a little bit of Elmer's glue all glue, not the washable glue, and I just squirt a little bit into the opening there. And then if you want to really, really make sure that it's secure, this is extra insurance, you could take a toothpick and insert that as a brace into your pumpkin, and then slide your coil onto that. Now you could just leave this as is and just have a pumpkin, you know, and that's really cute. It's adorable. When it's totally dry, you can decide to add a gloss onto it, like a Mod Podge or a matte an acrylic varnish, or you can get some inspiration from a well-known artist who has used pumpkins in her work, and that artist is Yayoi Kusama. And so her pumpkins tend to always have polka dots. So what I'm going to do, I've got this little jar of black paint, and you could wait until this is hardened and do this with markers, but if you don't want to wait and you're feeling a little impatient, you can use the ends of a paintbrush and dip that into the paint, and then you're just going to dot right onto it. So I'm starting with my smaller one. Actually, what I'm going to suggest is that we put it onto something, so that way we can turn it easily, and that way it's not damaging the pumpkin. If it's sticking, it's fine. Now, let's say I want to get a little bit bigger. I can switch to a bigger end of a paintbrush. I could go even bigger. Okay, so once I've gotten things a little bit bigger, it's going to get trickier to get underneath. So if you are able to raise this even higher, that would be great. Let's see if I'm able to do that. And I'm going to go back to the next size down because we're tapering around the pumpkin. So it's smaller at the top and smaller at the bottom, but bigger in the middle. So I'm going back to that sort of mid-size. Okay, so right now I've got just one row of dots on each section. You can go back, you can add more dots, or you could leave it at this. I think I'm going to add some more dots. There's my pumpkin. It's full of dots. I'm going to just take a tissue and wipe off all of my paint brushes because I don't want to have that paint stuck on there for next time. So get those all clean. You can even run them under some water to get them really clean, and then wipe any paint that you might have gotten on your work area. Of course, close up your paint jar. You want to make sure you always take good care of your materials. And there you go. That is a Model Magic pumpkin. I'm going to try to tilt it. I don't want it to fall, but I want to try to tilt it so you can see it. So there it is. Hope you had fun. This little pumpkin took about 2 days before the Model Magic was totally dry, and then I added a layer of glossy Mod Podge to it to give it this nice shiny finish.